DeSanto Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy, family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574 today. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane.
Good afternoon and welcome to Against the Boards. I'm your host, Chamberlain Bauder, here for another week of hockey and lacrosse in the Finger Lakes area. Thanks to my producer, Paul Russo, as we get rolling here. Obviously, last week was a awesome special episode having Mark Taylor in person, our biggest episode that we've had to date of the show. But with that, we got out of the loop of talking about, of course, the Knighthawks and the Rochester Americans, all those teams playing in Blue Cross Arena. I'll be there this weekend for that full end of the regular season. Of course, tomorrow night in Rochester, it's Fan Appreciation Night as the Amerks take on the Toronto Marlies. And then on Saturday, another Rochester and Toronto matchup as the Rock come to town to take on the Knighthawks. But first, we're going to get into the Amerks as, of course, as we just said, only 2 games left in the regular season. It's coming to an end after this weekend in the regular season sense of things. But we do already know where the Amerks are sitting in the playoffs. And of course, with that, we also know the thing that I kind of wanted to talk about last week, but didn't really have the opportunity to. Sabres got eliminated last week on Wednesday mathematically from the playoffs, so all of those important, vital players for this Amerks squad are able to get sent back down, and they don't have to play any of the dumb games that they were playing or trying to play, randomly calling Noah Ostlund up for a week and pulling him out of the AHL squad. So, with that said, of course, Devin Levi is still one of the best goalies in the American Hockey League right now, averaging 2.2 goals against and a .918 save percentage. That is tied for 5th, I believe, when it comes to save percentage of goalies right now. He is in that 6th spot, but one of those goalies in Caden Primo only played 25 games this season versus Devin Levi's 41. Just a little bit of difference in the numbers there. Obviously, these Amerks, as we talked about it many weeks as we've gone, they like to roll their 4 lines. They like to stay active just all over the ice throughout a game with Coach Leo's new kind of mindset. It's a little bit less flashy and speed-driven, I feel like, which is what it was under Appert, and a little bit more to that AHL grind. And because of that, we saw this team clinch a playoff berth way earlier in the season than they normally do. I mean, we look at the way the Amerks season regularly goes. I think yesterday would normally be the day that they would clinch, and then we wouldn't know the playoff position until Friday or Saturday's outcome. Now, we are guaranteed into the spot to know where the Amerks are going to be. They will be the 2nd seed in the North Division. Laval has clinched the North Division. They're 6 points clear of the Amerks at this point, but also the Amerks 7 points clear of the Crunch. There's just no way for the Crunch to catch up to Rochester in this spot. And now, of course, with that, though, as you can see right there, the spot where questions are going to come in is how driven are the Toronto Marlies for their back-to-back away and home stretch against Rochester to try to clinch that 4th spot and get the home playing against the 5 seed. That will be so key and is going to be so crucial for Toronto. So now the question is, if you're the Amerks, you're sitting in these 2 games, you can't get better playoff positioning. It opens up a conversation. In one sense, you don't want your momentum to die and you want to be able to play through this weekend and have strong efforts. But in another flip side of that, you don't want certain players to randomly end up getting injured in these 2 games. You don't want a guy who's been nursing something through the end of the season, probably pull him right out of the lineup. There's just different scenarios like that where I think there's a lot to be left up in the air with how these last 2 games of the season will go. But with that said, the identity of this Amerks squad all year has just been play every game the best that you can, play great hockey. And there's no question they don't want to stack up 2 losses at the end of the regular season before they have to then play the best hockey of their season. So with that said, I think we will likely see, at the very least, a competitive Amerks on the ice on Friday at home and then likely on the road in Toronto. But at the same time, if they pull out that win on Friday, you maybe go to that scratch list of those players that are healthy on the scratch list and you say, all right, you're getting playing time. Jagger, you're getting playing time. Kisakov, you're going to get playing time. I mean, just wherever you got to go down the line kind of thing to pull out those key guys that you don't want to get hurt in a last regular season game. But at the end of the day, we won't know. Also, I'd expect some Sandstrom games here. Maybe one of these goes to Levi just to, keep him warm, keep him rolling as they get into the playoff push next week. But again, no reason to put your best players in situations where they can get hurt when your playoff position cannot get any better and it cannot get any worse than it is right now with 2 games left. Short discussion, it feels like today for the Amerks, but I mean, realistically, that's all the talking that we need. They roll out of a 4-1 win last night against the Cleveland Monsters, just absolutely rolling through the Monsters on a Wednesday. Jobst, Metza, and Murray all recorded 2 points in that 4-1 win, but ultimately, for the Amerks right now, it is playoff time. And as you'll see in the conversation we're about to have about the Knighthawks, it's also playoff time there. We're just at that point in the season. This is the last weekend of regular season winter sports, we'll say, because they are still technically our winter sports. But it's both of these teams have done so well to this point in the regular season that ultimately nothing is left in their hands based on how this game goes. And when we get into the Knighthawks, there's a little bit left in their hands, but still so much left up in the air that they don't have control over. So ultimately, when the Amerks go into this weekend, they have certain things that they can control. And all that is, though, is players taking knocks, getting injured, or sitting on the bench, not playing and not getting injured. So ultimately, with that said, I mean, that's just my cautious mindset, I guess, looking at it and, seeing other teams around different sports throughout this spring, see different injuries happen and how it affects their team. I mean, you don't want to say it, but if this team loses one of their 4 centers, yes, they'll be able to fill that spot, but will they be able to fill it with the same kind of chemistry that they had through the last 2 months of the season as they pushed onto this second spot in the North Division? So ultimately, Amerks home and away tomorrow and Saturday against the Toronto Marlies. I think they pull it out at home tomorrow, but I don't think that they pull it out on Saturday just because of how ultimately irrelevant that Saturday game will be for them. I just think odds are, though, for Fan Appreciation Night, if anybody's going to show out, it's the Amerks at home on the Friday night, ready to go. That does it for the Amerks talk. And now we'll roll right into these Rochester Knighthawks, who, as we said, one more game in the regular season. They also play against Toronto tomorrow at 6 p.m. Had the chance to sit down with Mike Hazen for the pre-game press conference today. Just every week, every Thursday, we have that broadcast meeting, pretty much, is what it ends up being. But as we look through the Knighthawks at this point in the season, just a couple of laundry list items quick before we get into anything else. Rylan Reese, still nursing that injury, is looking on a track to be back by the playoffs, not on a track to be back by the regular season. Other notes, Mitch Ogilvy's still out. Obviously, Dan Coates is still in the lineup. Jake Pacino still in the lineup in place of Rylan Reese at the moment. But ultimately, when it comes down to these Knighthawks, it's similar to what we said about the Amerks, but not exactly the same. This NLL standings is one of the most chaotic things that I have ever looked at. The unified standings that we now have in the NLL, I think, are awesome for the sport. One, everybody gets to play each other, so you don't have to worry about, How will these two teams match up? We know, because they played at some point in the regular season. Also, too many times when there was a Western and an Eastern conference, there was just not enough teams in the West that were as good as the teams in the East. And now this year, that's not necessarily actually a problem. And actually, it's completely not a problem. It's 4-4 of the old East and the old West that are right now in the top 8 spots. But where the NLL standings are interesting is the fact that there are 4 teams with 1 record battling for that 7th and 8th spot, and 3 teams with 1 record battling for the 3rd through 5th spots on the standings. So let's break it down as simply as possible, because I know that these tiebreakers make 0 sense. There's really no other way to put it. They make 0 sense. If you look at it and you're a fan of the Knighthawks, you're seeing Vancouver above the Knighthawks and you're saying, okay, that makes sense. 1-0 Vancouver against the Knighthawks this season. They get that spot. But then you look at Halifax and you get super confused because you're like, well, we split the games with Halifax. They were both 1-goal games, so goal difference doesn't come into it. Why is Halifax above Rochester in this spot? Why aren't they at a dead tie and even? So let's look at exactly what the tiebreaker for how this works is. When you have teams that have the same record, if there are more than 2 teams with that same record, then you collect all of the teams. So in this case, Rochester, Vancouver, and Halifax. Now, they all played against each other. Vancouver and Halifax played once. Vancouver and Rochester played once. Rochester and Halifax played twice. So, because of that, you then take the head-to-head records in those sets of games as if it were a tournament setting, like a round-robin tournament, and that is how you shake out the tiebreaker, is the winning percentage based on that. So, Halifax beat Vancouver, beat Rochester once, lost to Rochester once. So in this situation, in this microcosm of the league this season, they are 2-1. Vancouver lost to Halifax, beat Rochester. So they're 1-1 or 500. Rochester, though, beat Halifax once, lost to Halifax once, and lost to Vancouver. So because of that, they only have the 33% winning percentage, and they sit at the bottom of those 3 teams. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what Rochester can do to get up. Nothing. There's literally nothing that Rochester can do that they are in true control of to define this. Now, if they win and Vancouver loses, yes, that would break this whole tiebreaker thing out of the situation, and ultimately, we're going to find out if Halifax can beat Toronto on tomorrow first. That would be sweet if Toronto just rolled in and said, hey guys, here you go. Here's a home playoff game. Now beat us, I guess, so that you can actually get it. That would be how that would have to shake out. But so Halifax plays Toronto tomorrow, and then it's Vancouver playing against Philadelphia on Saturday later on. So ultimately, neither of those are teams that I'm actually going to pick the opponent to the teams that Rochester would like to be ahead of. I mean, Philadelphia at this point in the season is in the 12th spot. Given they're at 7-10, they really don't have that terrible of a record, but they are 3rd to last in the league right now. And just lately, when you look at the hottest teams versus the least hot teams, those are 2 teams on completely different trajectories right now between Vancouver and Philadelphia. And then for Halifax, I mean, Toronto's 5-11, guys. They're not good this year. They traded away Nick Rose. They traded away their 2 best defenders in Mitch Dessou, and they still have Mazuka, but traded away multiple defenders on that back end, traded away literally the best player on the team in Nick Rose. Mark Matthews hasn't been healthy this season. It's shambles for Toronto. There's no other way to put it. They are not a good lacrosse team this year. And given they could walk into either of these settings and pull out a win, because realistically, the way that they play defense slows teams down from scoring, and then a guy like Josh Dawick can randomly pop off for 4 and they can find their area from a team perspective. But at the end of the day, just at the end of the day, this Toronto team is not that good. I've actually watched a lot of Toronto games this season. One of the other jobs that I have is tracking stats for teams across the league. So I watch different games. They shoot too early with zero purpose in their shot clock. They don't battle enough for those loose balls. It's really only Dan Craig and Chris Boucher that do, it seems like, at different times. And at the end of the day, with TD Erlin having been out for so much of the season, they can't get the ball enough to actually keep it down on the offensive end. And then when they do, Chris Boucher takes these stupid shots that are off target and they lose possession. So the turnovers are a major part of their offense. They turn over the ball a lot on offense and don't actually get to possess it there. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to sit here and say that about them against Rochester, because I am way too superstitious and terrified of what at any point the way that this Knighthawks team has been playing could just stop and they could all of a sudden revert back to hitting posts, which would suck. But against Halifax, which is a team that has the best face-off specialist in the entire league, against a team that is going to absolutely lay out every single shooter of Toronto, I do not like that matchup for the Rock in any way, shape, or form. So, with that said, likely still going to be dealing with the same record situation against Halifax. And Vancouver's maybe a little bit more up in the air, but, Christian Del Bianco is probably the best. No, stop saying probably. Christian Del Bianco is the best goalie in the NLL. And he's literally single-handedly been the key for not single-handedly. Keegan Ball's been lighting it up too, but Vancouver is one of the hottest teams in the league right now. I don't think a 7-10 Philly team is going to be the kryptonite that they need at the end of the season. So with that said, unfortunately, we're holding out for a miracle for a home playoff game now. And that's kind of where this conversation leads to and ends with for the Knighthawks here today, is they're in that 5th spot, and unless Toronto or Philadelphia put together probably their best game of the season at this point, they're going to stay in that 5th spot. And what's worse, they're going to have to go to Vancouver, which is, given at this point, really the way that this is going to shake out, that is the matchup that's going to happen. That's going to be the 4 versus 5 seed matchup no matter what. But having to travel all the way to the west coast of Canada to play that game instead of, really any of those teams above them are going to suck to travel to. But ultimately, it's just not, it's a complete polar opposite of the situation they could have been in. You're either home in Blue Cross Arena taking on a team that has to travel a far distance, or you are the team that literally has to travel across an entire country to get to your game. Now, given travel's normal for the NLL, nothing too crazy comes with that. But at the end of the day, you would much rather play that game in your barn than go to someone else's. Let's take a quick second to look at that bottom set of the standings there. You see the 7th and 8th spot controlled by the Georgia Swarm and the San Diego Seals right now. But Ottawa and Colorado also have those 8 and 9 records right now. So the way this whole situation shakes out is from that 7 to 10 spot right now is a 4-team tiebreaker. And with that 4-team tiebreaker, Georgia is winning it with a 67% win percentage there. So they're almost a shoe-in to the playoffs at this point in that 7th spot. And 8 at the moment is San Diego's because of their tiebreaker with the Ottawa Black Bears. So ultimately, as we go into this last week of the season, San Diego is going to be taking on an Albany team that's near the bottom of the pack, and they're going to be hoping for a win to just propel them into comfort in those playoff spots. Ultimately, Colorado, the injury bug just caught them really bad at the end of the season. No Eli McLaughlin, no Zed Williams. They haven't had Zed for a lot of the season, though, actually. And at the end of the day, if Connor Kelly is getting the number one defender, which he started to last week against Saskatchewan when they had a terrible game. They scored 2 goals in 45 minutes. When Connor Kelly's drawn that number one defender as the shooter for your team, he's not going to be able to get his shots. And it just ultimately fell apart for them. They just caught the injury bug at the wrong time, seemingly, and don't have the right subs in the offensive end to fill those voids. But then for Ottawa, they've got to go up against the Saskatchewan Rush. And given it's a game that doesn't matter for Saskatchewan, but it's the same kind of conversation we've been having about the Amerks earlier. You don't want to go into the end of the season with no momentum. If you lose your last game of the regular season, especially in the NLL where you only get to play 1 game a week, it's momentum death right there. And this Saskatchewan team is 100% clicking on all of the cylinders that they need to be right now. So at the end of the day, I mean, that should be their game. So as we look to the 8 teams that'll shake out in the playoffs, I'll try to give you somewhat of a prediction here. I think it's going to be the 8 that are there right now. At the end of the day, the Bandits, Rush, Thunderbirds, Warriors, and Knighthawks are all done. They're in, period. We know that they've clinched, actually. We do know they're in. So all it comes down to is Calgary, who's still 2 games back, much like Toronto is at this point. Calgary, Georgia, and San Diego are currently in those last 3 spots. And realistically, Calgary gets to go up against Las Vegas, who is the worst team in the league this year. And then they get to go up against the Colorado Mammoth, who we just ranted about their situation right now. So I think ultimately the Roughnecks will end likely at 10-8. That will secure them playoff seeding. And then as we look to the Georgia Swarm and the San Diego Seals, I mean, Georgia's always got one potentially against the Bandits, and maybe they finally said, well, we're okay at this spot, although they have not necessarily, well, they're in the 1 seed now, but ultimately Georgia's going to Buffalo. That game could get interesting, but they still have the tiebreaker situation over teams like Ottawa and Colorado. So if Ottawa and Colorado both lose their last game of the season, Georgia will still be that 8th seed, even at 8 and 10. Kind of being in that situation like Rochester was in last year when they had the 3% chance of making the playoffs and then everything did happen and they had the losing record and were able to go in. But yeah, so I think whatever way you spin it, Georgia and San Diego will be the last 2 teams to make it in to the playoffs. Calgary, I think, just the way the schedule is going to shake out for them, they will make it likely after their next game. So now, of course, predictions. We don't change up. We're not messing around. We know what we have to do here. Ultimately, the Toronto Rock are a team that will be rolling off of having played the day before. This is something that we talked about with Hazen. The last time the Knighthawks played a team that was rolling off of a back-to-back and they were off of a bye week, it was when they got clapped by Saskatchewan. So with that said, I do predict a hot start from Toronto. I think they'll probably score 4 in the first quarter. The question will be whether or not the Knighthawks can also score 4 in that first quarter, coming off of that bye, that time off, and getting back into the swing of things. So really, I mean, I think that first quarter completely defines how this game ends up going. But with that in mind, what I will say for the prediction, I will say 12-10 Toronto. I think if they get that first quarter, if they can get really ahead of the Knighthawks in that first quarter, then this game can be one of those catch-up games where Toronto can potentially try to coast with long possessions and just killing clock. But I also think that at the end of the day, everyone knows that the Knighthawks put up shots, and if you don't equal their shots, you're going to be in a deficit and digging yourself out of a hole. So at the end of the day, I think an early start from Toronto, and we'll give the prediction to them. Anyone confused right now because, this is one of your first times listening to an episode or you came after the Mark Taylor. the Knighthawks have won ever since I picked them to lose. So we're still going strong. Well, that about does it for us there. So theoretically, if everything shakes out that way, I mean, even if the Knighthawks lose and Calgary wins both of their games, the Knighthawks still have the tiebreaker over Calgary. So at the end of the day, they can lose and still be the 5 seed, or they can win, hope for a little bit of extra stuff, and have that chance at the home game. That's kind of how things shake out for the Knighthawks. And as we said with the Amerks, they're the 2 seed in the North Division, period. They are 6 points below Laval, 7 points above the Crunch, and everyone only has 2 games left. That's going to do it for us here today from Against the Boards. Remember, home and away for the Amerks starts tomorrow, and then it's home for the Knighthawks on Saturday. Thanks to my producer, Paul Russo, and we'll see you next week.